Упражнение в прямом эфире. Буду читать отрывок из послания президента Владимира Путина Федеральному Собранию Российской Федерации, который он сделал 21 февраля 2023 года. Эта часть будет на английском языке. Ее можно найти, перевод его речи, на сайте Kremlin.ru. То есть там будет n.kremlin.ru. И я его сохранил, сделал две колоночки текста, одну на русском, другую на английском, и сейчас прочитаю. То есть я сделал такой параллельный текст, да, и подчеркивал, выделял те слова, которые у меня вызывали затруднения в понимании, да, либо я их как-то не идентифицировал в доли секунды. Так, сейчас немножко. Да, кстати, вы можете всегда поддержать канал на Бусти, либо задонатить вот по ссылке в описании. Но на Бусти у меня там есть и текстовые статьи по изучению иностранного языка, по методике, какие у меня я описываю, возникали трудности, какие методы, способы я считаю полезными, успешными, которые абсолютно нерабочими. Так, и сейчас немножко тут настроим. Так, Путина видно. Все. Так, и вот у меня сам текст, да, он сохранен у меня на Яндекс.Диске, и я его буду зачитывать. Так, и цель вообще вот этого стрима, чтобы потом через месяц, через два посмотреть и оценить вообще качество своего, да, чтения, как я читаю, и сравнить, да, улучшилось оно, ухудшилось или осталось на месте, на одном уровне, да. Я не скажу, что я совершенно не волнуюсь, тем более, видите, прямой эфир, без всякой подготовки буду работать, но задача не в том, чтобы прочитать идеально, да, то есть некоторые слова я спотыкаюсь, я, кстати, ничего не делал, попытки читать, просто про себя читал, да, и выделял вот эти вот слова. Вот. То есть главное сейчас, один из таких ключевых навыков, это развивать чтение. Так, ну что, если вопросы появятся, да, пожалуйста, пишите в чатик. Так, чатик есть, кстати? Не знаю, не уверен. Чат отключен. Ну, в принципе, можно в комментариях писать. Так, не знаю, как его еще настроить. Сейчас, наверное, одну минутку. Так, чат сохранить. Должно что-то там появиться в чате, да? Ну ладно, если чат недоступен, в принципе, можете в комментариях писать, если будут вопросы. Итак, сейчас не то. Сейчас появится. Окей. Let's go, да, как говорится. Еще раз напоминаю, я читаю без подготовки, буду читать примерно до 13 страницы, но так как текст разделен на две колонки, получится примерно страниц 6 такого среднего шрифта. И потом дам свои комментарии. Чат, наверное, появился. Кто-то уже один или двое товарищей есть. Напишите плюсик, если слышно. И начнем. Повторяю, задача состоит не в том, чтобы идеально прочитать какой-то текст, а задача составляет, чтобы вообще прочитать и, например, сравнить через месяц, через два, ну или вообще через какой-то промежуток времени, возрос уровень, да, либо остался на том же месте. Окей. President of Russia Vladimir Putin. Good afternoon. Members of the Federational Assembly, senators, State Duma deputies, citizens of Russia. This presidential address comes, as we all know, as a difficult watershed period for our country. This is a time of radical, irreversible change in the entire world, of crucial historical events that will determine the future of our country and our people, a time when every one of us bears a colossal responsibility. 1 year ago, to protect the people in our historical lands, to ensure the security of our country and to eliminate the threat coming from the neo-Nazi regime that had taken hold in Ukraine after the 2014 coup, it was decided to begin the special military operation. Step by step, carefully and consistently, we will deal with the tasks we have at hand. Since 2014, Donbass has been fighting for the right to live in their land and to speak their native tongue. It fought and never gave up amid the blockade, constant shelling and the Kiev regime's over hatred. It hopes and waited that Russia would come to help. In the meantime, as you know well, we were doing everything in our power to solve this problem by peaceful means and patiently conducted talks on a peaceful solution to this devastating conflict. Behind our backs, a very different plan was being hatched. As we can see now, the promises of Western leaders, the assurances that they were striving for peace in Donbass, turned out to be a sham and outright lies. They were simply making time engaged in political chicanery, turning a blind eye to the Kiev regime's political assassinations and reprisals against undesirable people, their mistreatment or believers. They increasingly incited the Ukrainian neo-Nazis to stage terrorist attacks in Donbass. The officers of nationalist battalions trained at Western academies and schools. Weapons were also supplied. I would like to emphasize that prior to the special military operation, Kiev held negotiations with the West about the delivery of air defense systems, warplanes and other heavy equipment to Ukraine. We also recall the Kiev regime's vain attempts to obtain nuclear weapons. They discussed this issue publicly. The United States and NATO quickly deployed their army based in secret biological laboratories near Russian borders. They mastered the future theater of war during the war games, and they prepared the Kiev regime which they controlled and Ukraine which they had enslaved for a large-scale war. Now they admit this publicity publicly and openly, and they feel no shame about it. They seem to be proud and even to be reveling in their own perfidy, while calling the Minsk agreements and the Normandy format a diplomatic show and a bluff. It turns out that all this time, while Donbass was ablaze, while blood was being spilled, and while Russia sincerely made every effort to achieve a peaceful solution, I want to emphasize the word sincerely, they gambled on people's lives and in effect were playing with marked cards, as they say in certain circles. This appalling method of deception has been tried and tested many times before. They behaved just as shamelessly and duplicitously when destroying Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya and Syria. They will never be able to wash off this shame. The concepts of honor, trust and decency are not for them. Over the long centuries of colonialism, diktat and hegemony, they got used to being allowed everything, got used to spitting on the whole world. It turned out that way treat people living in our countries with the same disdain like a master. After all, they cynically deceived them too, tricked them with tall stories about the search for peace, about adherence to the UN Security Council resolution on Donbass. Indeed, the Western elites have become a symbol of total unprincipled lies. We firmly defend our interests as well as our belief that in today's world there should be no division into so-called civilized countries and all the rest, and that there is a need for an honest partnership that rejects any exclusivity, especially an aggressive one. We were open and sincerely ready for a constructive dialogue with the West. We said and insisted that both Europe and the whole world needed all indivisible security system equal for all countries, and for many years we suggested that our partners discuss this idea together and work on its implementation. But in response, we received either an indistinct of hypocritical reaction as far as words were concerned, but there were also actions: NATO expansion to our borders, the creation of new deployment areas for missile defense in Europe and Asia. They decided to take cover from us under an umbrella deployment of military contingent and not just near Russian borders. I would like to stress, in fact, this is well known, that no other country has so many military bases abroad as the United States. There are hundreds of them. I want to emphasize this: hundreds of bases all over the world. The planet is covered with them. And one look at the map is enough to see this. The whole world witnessed how they withdrew from fundamental agreements on weapons, including the Treaty of Intermediate and Shorter Range Missiles, in unilaterally tearing up the fundamental agreements that maintain world peace. For some reason they did it. They do not do anything without a reason, as we know. Finally, in December 2021, we officially submitted draft agreements on security guarantees to the USA and NATO. In essence, all fundamental points were rejected. After that, it finally became clear that the go-ahead for the implementation of aggressive plans had been given, and they were not going to stop. The threat was growing by the day. Judging by the information we received, there was no doubt that everything would be in place by February 2022 for launching yet another bloody punitive operation in Donbass. Let me remind you that back in 2014 the Kiev regime sent its artillery, tanks and warplanes to fight in Donbass. We all remember the aerial footage of airstrike targeting Donetsk. Other cities also suffered from airstrikes. In 2015, they tried to mount a frontal assault against Donbass again, while keeping the blockade in place and continuing to shell and terrorize civilians. Let me remind you that all of this was completely at odds with the documents and resolution adopted by the UN Security Council, but everyone pretended that nothing was happening. Let me reiterate that they were the ones who started this war, while we used force and are using it to stop the war. Who plotted a new attack against Donetsk in the Donbas region, and again Lugansk understood that Crimea and Sevastopol would be the next target. We realized this as well. Even today, Kiev is openly discussing far-reaching plans of this kind. They expose themselves by making public what we knew already. We are defending human lives and our common homes, while the West seeks unlimited power. It has already spent over 150 billion on helping and arming the Kiev regime. To give you an idea, according to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the G7 countries earmarked about 60 billion in 2020-2021 to help the world's poorest countries. Is this clear? They spent 150 billion on the war while giving 60 billion dollars to the poorest countries, despite pretending to care about them all the time, and also conditioning this support on obedience on behalf of the beneficiary countries. What about all this talk of fighting poverty, sustainable development and protection of the environment? Where did it all go? Has it all vanished? Meanwhile, they keep challenging more money into the war effort. They eagerly invest in showing unrest, the encouraging government coups in other countries around the world. The recent Munich conference turned into an endless stream of accusation against Russia. One gets the impression that this was done so that everyone would forget what the so-called West had been doing over the past decades. They were the ones who left the genie out of the bottle, plunging entire regions into chaos. According to US expert, almost 900 тысяч 900,000 people were killed during wars unleashed by the United States after 2001, and over 38 million became refugees. Please note, we did not invent the statistics. It is the Americans who are providing them. They are now simply trying to erase all this from the memory of humankind, and we are pretending all this never happened. However, no one in the world has forgotten this or will ever forget it. None of them cares about human casualties and tragedies because many trillions of dollars are at stake, of course. They can also continue to rob everyone under the guise of democracy and freedoms, to impose neoliberal and essentially totalitarian values, to brand entire countries and nations, to publicly insult their leaders, to suppress dissent in their own countries, and to divert attention from corruption scandals by creating an enemy image. We continue to see all this on television, which highlights greater domestic, economic, social and inter-ethnic problems, contradictions and disagreements. I would like to recall that in the 1930s, the West had virtually paved the way to power for the Nazis in Germany. In our time, they started turning Ukraine into an anti-Russia. Actually, this project is not new. People who are knowledgeable about history, at least to some extent, realize that this project dates back to the 19th century. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and Poland had conceived it for one purpose, that is, to deprive Russia of those historical territories that are now called Ukraine. This is their goal. There is nothing new here. They are repeating everything. The West expedited the implementation of this project today by supporting the 2014 COP. That was a bloody anti-state and unconstitutional COP. They pretended that nothing happened and that this is how things should be. They even said how much money they had spent on it. Russophobia and extremely aggressive nationalism formed its ideological foundation. Quite recently, a brigade of the armed forces of Ukraine was named Edelweiss after a Nazi division whose personnel were involved in deporting Jews, executing prisoners of war, and conducting punitive operations against partisans in Yugoslavia, Italy, Czechoslovakia, and Greece. We are ashamed to talk about this, but they are not. Personnel serving with the armed forces of Ukraine and the Ukrainian National Guard are particularly fond of chevrons formerly worn by soldiers from Das Reich, Totenkopf, Death's Head, and Galiciana divisions and other SS units. Their hands are also stained with blood. Ukrainian armored vehicles features insignia of the Nazi German Wehrmacht. Neo-Nazis are open about whose heroes they consider themselves to be. Surprisingly, none of the powers that be in the West are seeing it. Why? Because they, pardon my language, could not care less about it. They do not care who we're betting on in ways fights against us, against Russia. In fact, anyone will do as long as they will fight against us and our country. Indeed, we saw terrorists and neo-Nazists in their ranks. They would let all kinds of holes join their ranks, for God's sake, as long as they act on their will as a weapons against Russia. In fact, the anti-Russia project is part of the revanchist policy toward our country to create flashpoints of instability and conflict next to our borders. Back then, in the 1980s, 1930s, and now the design remains the same, and it's to direct aggression to the east, to spark a war in Europe, and to eliminate competitors by using a proxy force. We are not at war with the people of Ukraine. I have made that clear many times. The people of Ukraine have become hostages of the Kiev regime and its Western handlers, who have in fact occupied that country in the political, military, and economic sense, and have been destroying Ukrainian industry for decades now as they plundered its natural resources. This led to social degradation and an immeasurable increase in poverty and inequality. Recruiting resources for military operation in those circumstances was easy. Nobody was thinking about people who were conditioned for slaughter and eventually became expendables. It's a sad and dreadful thing to say, but it is a fact. Responsibility for inciting and escalating the Ukraine conflict, as well as the sheer numbers of casualties, lies entirely with the Western elites and of course today's Kiev regime, for which the Ukrainian people are, in fact, not in our people. The current Ukrainian regime is serving not national interest, but the interest of third countries. The West is using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia and as a testing range. I am not going to discuss in detail the West attempts to turn the war around or their plans to ramp up military supplies, since everyone is well aware of that. However, there is one circumstance that everyone should be clear about. The longer the range of the Western systems that will be supplied to Ukraine, the further we will have to move the threat away from our borders. This is obvious. The Western elite make no secret of their goals, which is, I quote, Russia's strategic defeat. What does this mean to us? This means they plan to finish us once and for all. In other words, they plan to grow a local conflict into a global confrontation. This is how we understand it, and we will respond accordingly, because this represents all existential threat to our country. However, they too realize it's impossible to defeat Russia on the battlefield and are conducting increasingly aggressive information attacks against us, targeting primarily the younger generation. They never stop lying and distorting historical facts as they attack our culture, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other traditional religious organizations in our country. Look what they are doing to their own people. It's all about the destruction of the family, of cultural and national identity, perversion and abuse of children, including pedophilia, all of which are declared normal in their life. They are forcing the priest to bless same-sex marriages. Bless their hearts. Let them do as they please. Here is what I would like to say in this regard. Adult people can do as they please. We in Russia have always seen it that way and always will. No one is going to intrude into other people's private lives, and we are not going to do it either. But here is what I would like to tell them. Look at the Holy Scripture and the main books of other world religions. They say it's all, including that family is the union of a man and a woman, but their sacred texts are now being questioned. Reportedly, the Anglican Church is just planning to explore the idea of a gender-neutral God. What is there to say? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Millions of people in the West realize what they are being led to a spiritual disaster. Frankly, the elite appear to have gone crazy, and it looks like there is no cure for that. But like I said, there are their problems, while we must protect our children, which we will do. We will protect our children from degradation and degeneration. Clearly, the West will try to undermine and divide our society and to bet on the third columnists who, throughout history, and I want to emphasize this, have been using the same poison of contempt for their own fatherland and the desire to make money by selling the poison to anyone who is willing to pay for it. It has always been that way. Who have embarked on the road of outright betrayal, committing terrorist and other crimes against the security of our society and the country's territorial integrity, will be held accountable for this under law, but we will never behave like the Kiev regime and the Western elite, which have been and still are involved in witch hunts. We will not settle scores with those who take a step aside and turn their back on their motherland. Let this be on their conscience. Let them live with this. They will have to live with it. The main point of that our people, the citizens of Russia, have given them a more moral assessment. I am proud, and I think we are all proud, that our multi-ethnic nation, the absolute majority of our citizens, have taken a principled stance of the special military operation. They understand the basic idea of what we are doing and support our actions of the defense of Donbass. This support primarily revealed their true patriotism, a feeling that is historically inherent in our nation. It's stunning in its dignity and deep understanding by everyone, I will stress everyone, of the inseparable link between one's own destiny and the destiny of the fatherland. My dear friends, I would like to thank everyone, all the people of Russia, for their courage and resolve. I would like to thank our heroes, soldiers and officers in the army and the navy, the Russian guards, the secret services staff and all structures of authorities, the fighters in Donetsk and Lugansk corps, volunteers and patriots who are now fighting in the ranks of the BARS, Combat Army Reserve. I would like to apologize that I will not be able to mention everyone during today's speech. You know, when I was drafting this speech, I wrote a very long list of these heroic units, but then removed it from my text because, as I said, it's impossible to mention everyone, and I was afraid to offend everyone I might leave out. My deepest gratitude to the parents, wives and families of our defenders, the doctors and paramedics, combat medics and medical nurses that are saving the wounded, to the railway workers and drivers that are supplying the front, to the builders that are erecting fortification and restoring housing, roads and civilian facilities, to the workers and engineers at defense companies who are now working almost around the clock in several shifts, and to rural workers who reliably ensure food security for the country. I am grateful to the teachers who sincerely care for the young generations of Russia, especially those that are working in very difficult, almost frontline conditions, the cultural figures that are visiting the zone of hostels and hospitals to support the soldiers and officers, volunteers that are helping the front and civilians, journalists, primarily war correspondents, what are risking their lives to tell the truth to the world, pastors of Russian traditional religions and military clergy, whose wise words support and inspire people, government officials and business people, all who fulfill their professional, civil and simply human duty. My special words go to the residents of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic and the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. You, my friends, determined your future and the referendums and made a clear choice despite the neo-Nazis' threats and violence amid the close military actions. But there had been nothing stronger than our intent to be with Russia, with your motherland. I want to emphasize that this is the reaction of the audience of the residents of the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic and the Zaporozhye and Kherson regions. Once again, our deepest respect for them all. We have already begun and will expand a major socio-economic recovery and development program for this new region within the Federation. It includes restoring production facilities, jobs, and the port of the Sea of Azov, which again became Russia's landlocked sea, and building new, modern roads like we did in Crimea, which now has a reliable land transport corridor with all of Russia. We will definitely implement all of this plan together. Russia's regions are currently providing direct assistance to the cities, districts and villages in the Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic and the Zaporozhye and Kherson region. They are doing it sincerely like true brothers and sisters. We are together again, which means that we have become even stronger, and we will do everything in our power to bring back the long-awaited peace to our land and ensure the safety of our people. Our soldiers, our heroes, are fighting for this, for these ancestors, for the future of the children and grandchildren, for uniting our people. Friends, I would like to ask you to pay your respects to our fellow soldiers who were killed in the attacks of neo-Nazis and raiders, who gave up their lives for Russia, for civilians, the elderly, women and children. A minute of silence. Thank you. We all understand, and I understand also, how unbearably hard it is for their wives, sons and daughters, for their parents who raised those dignified defenders of the fatherland, like the young guard members from Krasnodon, young men and women who fought against Nazism and for Donbass during the Great Patriotism War. Everyone in Russia remembers their courage, resilience, enormous strength of spirit and self-sacrifice to this way. Our duty is to support the families that have lost their loved ones and to help them raise their children and give them an education and a job. The family of each participant in the special military operation must be priorly and treated with care and respect. Their needs must be responded to immediately without bureaucratic delays. I suggest... Так, ну вот, все, 13 страниц прочитано. Что хочу сказать, друзья, по опыту, да, первый абзац еще так бодро начинаю, потом начинают уже путаться слова, сухость во рту, какая-то зевота появляется, чешется в носу, то есть, ну, каждому по-своему. Завтра, наверное, я продолжу чтение данной статьи. Возможно, будет такой челлендж, да, буду читать прямо вот на протяжении часа. Сейчас у нас сколько идет уже? 40 минут я уже в прямом эфире, пока что разговариваю сам с собой. Вот, зрителей у меня нет, я один просто смотрю с другого канала. Но дело-то не в этом. Да, дело в том, что вот такой челлендж, да, просто вы можете изучать английский язык, просто завести себе YouTube канал и там уже отрабатывать каждый день, да, вот стрим запустил, пусть его никто не смотрит, неважно. Это упражнение для вас, вы так тренируетесь. И потом, через год, вы будете уже... Очевидно, что будет прогресс, да, вы будете уже, возможно, с улыбкой смотреть на ваши прошлые усилия, потуги, прочитать даже вот простое слово, например. Вот что хочу сказать. Да, завтра, наверное, тоже продолжу, буду читать, пока уже язык вот не начнет заплетаться. Не забывайте оказать поддержку вот тут на Бусти, да, мне будет очень приятно, поможет меня воодушевить, вдохновить, ну или донатик, конечно, тоже будет спасибо. Так, ну что же, всем спасибо, следите за развитием канала, если вы занимаетесь английским языком, продолжайте заниматься, иначе я уйду вперед, потом не догоните. Ладно, всем спасибо, всем пока.